This is a story, Whitebear Whittington. It's from the Appalachian Mountains that was told by some mountain people. One time there was a man who had 3 daughters, and his wife was dead. And the 3 girls, they kept house for him. And one day he was fixing to go to town. So he called his girls and asked them what did they want him to bring them. And the oldest told him, says, "I want a silk dress the color of every bird in the sky." And the second girl said, "I want you to bring me a silk dress made out of every color in a rainbow." The youngest one, she didn't say anything. So directly he went and asked her, didn't she want him to bring her something too? And she studied a minute and says, "All I want is some white roses. If you see a white rose bush anywhere, you might break me a basketful." Well, he took him a basket of eggs and got on his horse and went on to town. Got all his trading done and started back. He rode on and rode on. Come to where there was a thick wilderness of a place, and saw a big rose bush side the road full of white roses. So he got off his horse and he broke off a few, and he thought he heard something behind him. Says, "You break them and I'll break you." So he stopped, he looked around, he waited a while, and he tried to see what it was that spoke. He didn't see anybody nor hear it again, so he broke off some more. Then he heard it real plain. Sounded like it was back in the wilderness. "You break them and I'll break you." He started to quit that time, but he still couldn't see anybody or anything, and the prettiest roses was still on the bush. So he reached out his hand to break them off, and that thing said, "Give me what meets you first at the gate. You can break all you want till your basket is full." He thought a minute or two, and he knew that his old dog always come loping out in the road whenever he got in home. And the old hound wasn't much good anyway, so he answered, and he says, "Whatever meets me first at the gate, you can come and take it whenever you want." Went back and broke white rosebuds until his basket was full. He got on his horse and he rode on in home. He kept looking for his dog to come out, but the old hound was up under the house asleep. And before he could whistle for it, here come his youngest girl flying out the gate to meet him. He hollered to her and motioned her to go back, but she wasn't paying him any mind and came right on. She took his basket and was carrying on over how pretty the roses were. So she thanked him and went helping him unload his saddlebags. When they got to the house, she saw he was looking troubled. She says, "What's the matter, Daddy?" But he wouldn't tell her. He never come to the table when they called him to supper. He just sat there on the porch looking back down the holler. So the girls, they ate their supper, and it got dark directly, and they lit the lamp. They sat there sewing and talking, and all at once they heard a voice out in the road. "Send out my pay." Their daddy came in the house then, told them what and all he had heard, and when he broke the roses. And the oldest girl says to him, says, "Oh, send out the dog. How could it know what met you first?" So they called the dog, and they sicked him out toward the gate, and he ran out barking, and when they heard him come back a-howling, scared to death, he crawled way back under the floor and stayed there. Then they heard it again. "Send out my pay." So the 2 oldest girls said they wasn't afraid, said they'd go see what it was, and out they went. And directly there was a commotion at the gate, and the 2 girls come tearing back to the house so scared they couldn't speak. Then it hollered louder, "Send out my pay." And the youngest girl said, "I'll have to go, Daddy, but don't you worry. I'll come back some way or other." So she gathered up her few things in a bag and kissed her father and went on out to the gate, and there stood a big white bear. "Get up on my back," it told her. So she crawled up on its back, and it started off. And the girl was crying so hard her nose bled, and 3 drops of blood fell on the white bear's back. They went on, and way up in the night she made out how they went past a big white rose bush out in the thick wilderness. come to a fine house out there, and the white bear stopped and told her, "Get off now." So she got off and went on in the house. And the white bear came in behind her and says, "Light that lamp there on the table." So she lit the lamp, and when she turned back around, there stood a good-looking young man. And the minute she looked at him, she thought the world of him. She loved him. He said to her then, says, "This house and everything in it belongs to you now, and there's nothing here to hurt you." Then he took the lamp and they went all through all the rooms looking at all the fine things. And directly they come to a pretty bedroom, and he told her, says, "Now, I've got a spell on me, and I can't be a man but part of the time. From now on I can be a man of a night and stay here with you, or be a bear of a day. Or I can be a bear of a night and sleep under your bed and be a man of a day. Which had you rather I'd be?" So she thought about it, and she didn't like the idea of a bear laying under her bed of a night. So she told him she'd rather he'd be a man of a night. So that was the way it was. He was a bear in the daytime, and he'd lie around outside while she kept house. And when dark came, he'd be a man. He kept plenty of wood and water in the house, and they talked together, and he was good company. So they lived on, and she lived happy, even if her husband did have to be a bear half the time. She told him how it was. He told her how it was. He'd been witched. Said he'd get out of it someday, but he didn't know just how it would be. And after 3 or 4 years, she had 3 little babes, 2 boys and a girl. Then when her last one was big enough to walk, she told her husband she wanted to go back and see her father again. It looked like that troubled him, but he told her all right, they would go. But he said she would have to promise him not to tell anybody anything about him, and never to speak his name. "If you speak my name to any living soul, I'll have to go away, and you'll see me going up over the mountain, and it would be awful hard for us ever to get together again." So she promised him, and early the next morning he took her and the 3 children on his back, and he let them off at her father's gate. She took her babes and went on in the house, and they were all proud to see her again, and told her how pretty her children were, and commenced asking her who her husband was and where she lived and all. She told them she couldn't tell. Well, they kept on at her, and she kept telling them she couldn't possibly tell. So her sisters, they started acting mad and wouldn't speak to her. Still, she wouldn't tell. The next day, her daddy took her aside and spoke to her about it and says, "Just tell me his name." She thought surely it ought to be to tell her own father what a man's name was, so she whispered it to him, "Whitebear Whittington." And she hadn't but spoke it when she looked up, and she saw her husband, and he was in the shape of a man, and he was going up over the piney mountain, and on the back of his white shirt was 3 drops of blood. Well, she loved him, so she left the children there with her father and started out to try to find her man again. She took out the way he went over the piney mountain, but she never did see him on ahead of her. But she went on and went on. Sometimes she'd think she was lost, but a white bird would fly over and drop a white feather with a red speck on it. So she'd go on the way that bird was headed. Then she'd stop at a house to stay the night, and they'd tell her about the fine young man that stayed there the night before. Had 3 drops of blood on his shirt. So she went on for 7 years. That bird would fly out whenever she got downhearted, so she didn't give up. Then one evening she stopped at a house and called to stay the night, and an old woman, awful stricken in age, came to the door. Looked like she was over 100 years old. She was walking on 2 sticks. Told her to come on in, and the old woman looked at her and says, "Girl, you're in bad trouble now, ain't you?" So she told the old lady about what and all had happened, and how she'd been trying to find her man again. And directly the old woman told her, said, "Now you just stay here with me now and get rested up a little, and it may be I can help you. I got a lot of wool to work, and I need somebody. Will you stay and help me about my wool?" She said yes, she would. So the next day they got all the fleece out, and she helped pick out all the burrs and the trash and washed the wool in the creek while the old woman carded so fast the girl had a time keeping it with her, and they got it all done by sundown. And that night the old woman gave her a gold chinky pin. And the next day the girl she helped with the spinning handed the rolls of carded wool to the old lady, and it was a sight in the world to see how she could spin. They got it all spun up about dark, and that night the old woman handed her a gold hickory nut. Then the third day the old woman sat down at her loom, and the girl kept fixing the bobbins and handing them to her, and the old loom went clack, wham, all day long, and just before dark the weaving was all done. So that night the old woman gave her a gold walnut, says, "Now you keep these 3 gold nuts, and don't crack them until you're in the most trouble you could ever be in. If the first one don't get you out, crack the next, and if you have to crack the last one, you surely ought to be out of your trouble by then." So she thanked the old woman the next morning and left with the 3 gold nuts in her apron pocket. And she went on and went on. In 3 days she came to a river. And she went along the river until she came to a washing place, and there was a great crowd of young women was gathered. And there in the middle of them women she saw her husband. She got through the crowd and went up to him, but when he looked at her, it was just as he had never had known her before in all his life. He didn't have any shirt on, and she saw the women lined up before the washing place, and one girl was down on her knees, washing his shirt with all her might. She listened and heard him talking about how the young man had said he'd marry the one who could wash the blood out of his shirt. So she got in line and finally got down to the washing place. And the one ahead of her was a big, stout woman, and she was down on her knees washing that shirt so hard it looked like she'd tear it apart. She'd soap it and maul it with a battling stick and rinse it and soap it and maul it again, but the blood just got darker and darker. So directly the girl said she'd like to have her turn. The other woman didn't get up off her knees. She just looked at her and says, "If I can't get this blood out, I know a puny thing like you can't do it." Well, that girl, she just leaned down and took hold of this shirt and gave it one rub, and it was white as snow. But before she could turn around, the other woman grabbed it and ran with it and said, look, I washed it out." So the young man had to go home with her. His real wife knew now that she was in the most trouble she could ever be in. So she followed him, and she saw what house it was, and about dark she went there and went right in the door and cracked her gold chinky pin. It called out the finest gold wool you ever saw, just one long carded roll ready to be spun. So she started pulling out the gold wool, and pretty soon the other woman came in and saw it and said, "Oh, I must have that. What will you take for it?" "Well, I couldn't part with my gold nut." "You name any price you want now, and I'll give it to you. Let me stay this night with your man, and you can have it." "Well, I must have that gold chinky pin. You go on out and wait till I call you." So she took the gold chinky pin and put it away, and then she put a sleepy pillow on the young man's bed. And just before he went to bed, she gave him a sleepy dram. And then she called that girl, and when she went into him, he was sound asleep. She sat down beside him, and she tried to wake him up, but he slept right on. So she stayed there by him all night, crying and singing, "3 drops of blood I shed for thee, 3 little babes I've borne for thee. Whitebear Whittington, turn to me." And when daylight came, the other woman made her leave. Well, the girl came back the next evening and broke the gold hickory nut. And a fine spinning wheel came out of it, stood right up in the floor, and started spinning. All you had to do was put the gold chinky pin in a crack in the logs and set the end of the wool in the spindle, and it spun right on, spin and wind, all by itself. It was the finest gold thread you ever saw. When the woman came in and saw it, she said she had to have that wheel. So the girl let her have it for another night with her man. But when she went in, he slept right on through the night, because that sleepy pillow was still under his head, and the woman had gone and given him another sleepy dram. So all night his wife stayed by him, trying to wake him. 3 drops of blood I shed for thee, 3 little babes I born for thee. Whitebear Whittington, turn to me. Early in the morning the other woman came and said, "Get out now, your time's up." Well, the next evening the father of that woman called the young man just before bedtime. Said he wanted to have a word with him. So they walked out a ways, and the old man said to him, "I couldn't sleep a bit last 2 nights. There's some kind of crying noise been going on in your room. And somebody's singing a mournful song right on top
up through the night. The young man said he'd slept uncommon sound the last 2 nights, hadn't heard a thing. Well now, says the old man, I want you to be sure to stay awake tonight and listen and see what all that carrying on is. So that night the girl came and cracked the gold walnut. The big loon came out. Just reared up in the house till she broke the nut. It was warped and had gold warp, and all you had to do was feed its bobbin so that the gold thread, and it wove right on all by itself. The woman, she heard it a-beating, and she came running. Oh my, I must have that. What'll you take for your loom? The girl told her. Well, she says real hateful like, you just stay with him tonight, and I'll tell you right now, it's the last time. So she made the girl go out, and then she looked about that sleepy pill still on the bed, and went and fixed the sleepy dram, made it real strong. When the young man came in to go to bed, she handed him, made him drink it, but he kept it in his mouth. When she left, he spit it out. Then he looked at that pillow and threw it off the bed, laid down and closed his eyes. The woman, she looked in at him to make sure he was asleep, then she let that girl in. She came in the room and she saw him there with his eyes shut, and her grief nearly killed her. She didn't know what she'd do. She came and sat on the edge of the bed and put her hand on his shoulder and started crying. 3 drops of blood I've shed for thee, 3 little babes I've born to thee. Whitebear Whittington. Well, time she called his name, he opened his eyes and turned to her, and he knew her. So he put his arms around her, and they went on to sleep. The next morning, the other woman came and found the door locked, and she was mad. And after they got up, the young man said, he came and he called the woman's father, and he said, let's step out. I got a word with you. I want a word with you. So they went out and told the old man, he says, if you had a lock and a key, and the key fitted the lock perfect, and you lost that key and got a new one, then you found the old key again, and it fitted the lock much better than the new one, which key would you keep? The old man answered him, says, well, I'd keep the old one. Well, says the young man, I found my old wife last night, and she suits me a lot better than your daughter does, so you just can have her back. So they left, and they got their children and went on home, and that spell on him was broke, so he never was a bear again, and they lived happy